Hello, friends. So today we are going to look at the game between Maxime Vachier Lagrave of France and Ian Nepomniatchtchi of Russia. So Maxime is white in this game, and Ian Nepomniatchtchi is black. This game was played in the Candidates Chess Tournament of the year 2020 to challenge the world champion Magnus Carlsen later this year. So let's take a look at this game. Um, Game starts with 4 6. So Ian Nepomniatchtchi has played the French defense before, especially in this tournament. He played French in the fourth round against Kirill Alexenko. That came in a draw. It seems like the French is suiting him well. We'll jump right into the main variation of French defense. So this is the Winawer variation, bishop d4. Black is attacking the e4 pawn, right? So white pushes it, black starts attacking the center, and this is all standard theory. Black takes the knight, white takes the bishop, knight e7, and now white plays h4. So this is move number 7, and there are many different alternatives that white can play here. Instead of h4, there is queen g4, there is knight f3, and there is a4. And these are like the 4 main variations. So any of these moves can be played with a good chances for white. But Maxime decides to play h4. The idea of h4 is to start controlling squares on the king side and try to create weaknesses in black's position by attacking with the h pawn. Black plays queen c7, and Maxime goes h5. So the idea here for white is to play h6 and then create dark square weaknesses in the position. So if black allows white to play h6, then his position becomes really weak on the king side, and strategically we can already consider that kind of position as lost for black. So black plays h6 here to stop white's h pawn from advancing, and Maxime plays rook b1. So in the French defense, the position, the center is pretty closed, and so the plans for white and black, they are mostly decided by the pawn structure. So as you can see, white has this pawn structure c3, d4, e5. And the pawn structure is a very good indicator of where your strategical ideas should be, or which side of the board a player should concentrate on. So as you can see, white's pawn structure goes from c3 to e5, and the pawn structure is kind of an arrow, right? So when you go from c3 to e5, it's pointing towards the king side. And this is a very good visual aid to understand where your plans should be. So white is mainly concentrating on the king side. But having said that, white has to be careful to not allow too much counterplay to black on the queen side. As you can see, black's pawn structure goes from f7 to d5, and his arrow is pointing towards the queen side. So that's why white plays this prophylactic move, rook b1. It's a useful move in cases where the b file opens up, or if black starts to play, like create threats on the queen side. So rook b1 is a good move. Also, I'd like to say that at the current moment, it is unclear where white's pieces should get developed. So this bishop on f1 can get developed to e2 or d3 or even to b5. In some cases, you can bring the bishop to h3 to help in the advance of the kingside pawns from f4 to f5, right? The bishop can help from h3. So the bishop has different options to go. Similarly, white's knight, it can go to either of these 3 squares. And what I'm trying to say here is that white will decide where to develop his bishop and knight depending on black's reaction. So the placement of these two minor pieces, f1 bishop and g1 knight, it's not decided. So it will depend on the next moves that black will play. So in the meantime, it just makes sense for white to develop his rook to b1, which he will need to do anyway in the future. So from that angle, rook to b1 is a very useful and a good waiting move in the opening. So black plays b6, and now, as I said earlier, black tries to play on the queen side. But if you watch the pawn structure, black has his pawns on the light square, which makes his c8 bishop sort of bad, right? So this bishop has the same color as the pawns, and so in a classical sense, the c8 bishop is bad. And for that reason, black is trying to exchange the c8 bishop for white's good bishop. So that's the idea behind b6. Maxime just plays one move to attack black's kingside. And now black plays rook g8. So there is another alternative that black plays here, which is king f8. And this is sort of like a voluntary king move by black. He uses his king to protect his kingside. There are like many games played with king f8 also. So it's king f8 also is an alternative for black. But Ian plays rook g8. And the idea behind rook g8 is really interesting. So by playing rook g8, black is preserving his king's ability to castle. So kingside castling is definitely not possible after rook g8 because rook has moved. But black is secretly hoping that he will get to castle his king onto the queen side. That's why he's playing rook to g8, so that he still has that king side castling possibilities. And he still threatens bishop to a6, right? And white's next move is really interesting with that context. He plays bishop b5 check. And on the outset, it would seem why this check is given. But if you try to think on what black should play next, white's idea becomes clear. So say, for example, black plays knight to c6. After knight c6, bishop a6 is no longer possible, right? So bishop b5 is trying to throw black's plans off balance. It's a move which creates imbalance or not imbalance but disturbance in black's position, and it does not allow black to execute his ideas as he would have liked to. So knight c6 prevents bishop to a6. Similarly, knight to d7, again bishop a6 is not possible. After bishop d7, again bishop a6 is not possible, and then white can just retreat back to bishop b3. So white wanted to play bishop b3 all along, but bishop b5 check is used to create this sort of disturbance. And if black plays knight e7 to c6, then a very interesting thing occurs here, which is now the f5 square is not guarded. So white has the ability to play f4 and f5, right? So let's say black plays bishop a6, takes knight into a6, and now white is able to break through on the king side. So that's one thing he can do. However, immediately we can see that after knight e7 to c6, the rook on g8 is not guarded, so white can simply take bishop h6 because the pawn on g7 is pinned. So bishop g5 check is really a very good move. It creates disturbance in black's position. Prevents black from executing some of his ideas. So for that reason, black plays king f8. He really wants to keep that option of playing bishop a6. So that's why he plays king f8. And white should be careful here. The bishop on d5 can become trapped. So let's say white is not careful and he allows black to play c4. Then this bishop is trapped because now black can play e6 and b5, and white will become pieced out. So for that reason, white plays bishop to d3. So the idea being that if black plays c4, then white will just return to bishop to e2, or maybe bishop to f1 also. Both of these moves are fine. And by playing c4, you might think that black is getting a tempo. But in a strategical sense, black is closing the position and is taking the tension off of center. So strategically, c4 would be a weak move, and also it prevents black from exchanging his bishop with white's bishop, right? c4, even though it gives a tempo to black, it's not really a very good move. Black continues with his idea of playing bishop a6, and now white takes d into c5. So here, black's idea is to take on d3 and create and create double pawns on the d5. So let's say black gets an extra move. What he will do is he can take c into g4. Obviously, if queen to d4, then black can simply play knight c6 and capture the e5 pawn. But if I take c into g4, then black can take bishop into d3, c into d3, and I have this double pawns on d file, which can become potential weaknesses. So for that reason, white takes d into c5. And now if black takes on d3, then I can straighten my pawns out. So yeah, bishop d3, my pawns have become straightened. And now I guess a valid question here would be, can black take the e5 pawn? So in the game, black played knight d7. But let's see what happens if black takes queen d5 check. If queen d5, then white plays knight t2. And if black takes c5, then I will play bishop f4, and now the knight on b8 is lost. Right. So for that reason, black cannot take the extra pawn. So I mean, he cannot take the pawn on c5, and so he will have to continue his development. Let's say something like knight d7, and then I will take c into b6. And there are equal number of pawns, but black will have a weakness on the b5. And as you can see, white has 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns, and black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. So white has not lost a pawn here, but he has greater weakness on b6. So let's go back. So that's why black just continues taking continues with knight d7. He could have taken b into c5, which would have led to transposing to the game. So knight d7 is just a fancy way of taking the pawn on c5. Of course, if white takes c into b6, then white can take queen into c3 check, and then queen into d3. Right. So it's just a fancy knight d7 is a very fancy move. White plays d4, now b into c5, and white plays queen d1. So queen d1 looks like a strange move, but to explain this move, let us consider one variation. Let's say white decides to develop his knight to e2. Now, what black can do is he can take, and play queen c2. And what we see here is that, okay, even though white does not lose a piece, he can play rook a1. But what we see here is that the queen side has become more spacious because the pawns have been exchanged, and black has started to control the light squares in white's position, and this can create some very undesired pressure on white's queen side. Whereas the white queen on g4, it's not doing much at the moment. The pawn on g7 is protected by king and rook, and there are not immediate threats on black's king side. So effectively, White's queen has done its job on g4. Like by coming to g4, it has broken the Black King's castle, and it has essentially made Black's kingside pieces passive due to the pawn on g7. So the queen's job on g4 is done, and now it is required on the queen side. So that's why White brings it back to queen d1, because White needs to start paying attention to the queen side due to this tension on c5 and d4, right? So he needs to start controlling his white squares on the queen side. Queen a5, attacking c3, bishop d2, protect the pawn on c3, and now Black plays rook b8. So here there is a possibility that Black might take the pawn on a3, but this pawn really becomes a taboo because now White can simply just continue with his development. And if Black now wants to play rook b8, then White can play rook a1 and take the pawn on a7, and White's rook is really fantastically placed on a1. It's creating pressure on Black's position. So Black cannot play rook b8, and so he has to bring back his queen, so that now he can start challenging his rook to b8, and White castles rook b8, rook a1, queen b7, and White plays queen a4. And eventually, because Black's king side is not well developed, White will have an extra rook for some time on the queen side, and the a7 pawn should fall. So let's say Black plays rook a8, then I'll play rook b1, and if queen c7, then White can start opening up new lines on the queen side. Maybe he plays queen a6. First, the idea being I want to play rook b7, and if knight b6, then I can simply take rook into b6. So what happens here is that White's pieces start infiltrating Black's queen side. If Black takes the pawn on a3, by taking the pawn on a3, the Black queen has to make a few other moves, which gives White a lead in development. He has to take the queen on a3, then go back. Right, he's going back to a6, then he's going back to b7, and he's losing a few precious moves, which will give White a development initiative. So that's why Black does not take queen into a3. He plays rook b8. For Black, the priority is to exchange as many pieces as he can to reduce White's pressure. If White is allowed to castle and keep more pieces on the board, then this bad position of Black, like this bad king side, this badly developed king side of Black will give him problems in the future. So that's why Black is trying to exchange more pieces as much as he can. White plays knight t2, and Black plays c4. So c4, I think c4 was a strategical mistake, but seems like Nepomniatchtchi had other plans. Of course, it's always easy to say something is a mistake after the game is over, but the players who are actually playing the game, they have a much harder job than we do. They have to play a game while the clock is ticking, and sometimes they have to take some risky decisions because they want to win the game. So here, I think the tournament situation would have proposed that Ian could go for a draw. Ian is leading by 1 point at this point in the tournament, and Maxime is trailing him by 1 point. So a draw would have been fine, and he would have played a safer move like knight c6, or maybe take queen into b1, and then take queen b6 and start exchanging more pieces. He would have done this, but seems like he was being ambitious. So he plays c4, and I think c4 is at the least a very dubious strategical decision because it takes the tension off of the d4 pawn, which leaves both the white bishop and white knight to create more threats. Okay, castle, very standard move, development. He plays rook b6, and white plays queen c2, and rook h8, a4. So this is all going very standard. White is trying to create more space on the queen side. King e8. So as I said, black's king side is undeveloped, and so Ian is hoping to play something like king e8, king c7, and eventually king is draw. But it's going to be pretty slow. There's rook b4. The idea being I want to increase the pressure on the b file by bringing this rook to b1. Rook b6 can be played, but I think it's a weaker move than rook b4 because now it allows black to play into b6 and potentially making this pawn weak on the a file. So from that view, rook b4 is a better move. Right, black plays knight c6, and I think this is a good position for some of you to think on, to think on white's next move. What you guys can do is pause the video at this time and think on white's move, on what white should do. Maxime played a very creative move here, and I think it was not only a creative move, but it was also a very good move. Which I think kind of was the critical point in the game. So for all of you guys who want to think on this position, we'll take a 2-second pause and then continue. All right, so if you have thought on this position, let's see how white continued. f4. And I think f4 is a very powerful psychological blow also, because here black is attacking white's rook on b4, and white just ignores it, and he starts attacking black's king side. Let's see what happens if black takes knight into b4. So knight into b4, c into b4. So like a quick variation is what happens if black gives back the exchange. If he plays rook into b4, then he loses the piece, right? And now wherever the rook goes, I'll take queen into a5, and white will take up this rook, and he will end up being a piece up. So giving back the exchange doesn't work, and now black has to go queen a6. White goes f5. So here my idea is to play f into e6 and then ultimately attack on f7 by my rook and also by my queen. Right, so let's say if it takes ef5, queen into f5, and if rook f8, then white can continue the attack by playing at f4. And if queen b7, then I can go e6, takes, then I can go queen g6 check. And if he goes king d8, then knight into e6 check, and I get back the exchange, but my attack also continues. And if he plays king e7, then I play queen into g7 check. If rook f7, then knight g6 check, and now I will take the rook on f7. So let's go back a few moves. At this time, like this particular pawn structure is really fantastic for white. First of all, black's king is really weak, and the d5 pawn is now a potential target for white, and is going to keep on attacking black's position. So this is a very good position for white with an excellent compensation. So one quick reminder here is that black cannot castle. Black just cannot castle because his king has already moved earlier. So once the king has moved, it cannot cancel again. So that's one doubt I wanted to address here. All right, let's go back. So obviously taking the exchange on b4 would lead to a massive attack on black's king side. So that's why Ian had to kind of admit a mini defeat here. That is his last move, which was knight to c6, wasn't that good, and he went back again to control the f5 square. So White continued with his plan of pressing black on the queen side, and black plays f5. So I think f5 is a good move by Ian. He desperately needs space on the king side, and he wants to play king f7 and rook h8. So f5 with that idea is really a good move. But already black's position is very crowded, and he's behind in development. So if white can increase the pressure in the next two moves, black is going to have a lot of problems. So again, this is another critical moment in this game, in this middle game. So I would again urge you to think about 15 minutes on this position, on how you as white would like to continue. Whether you would take into f6 or not, that is the question. Would you take the en passant or not? And if not, then what other plan does white have? Maxime comes up with a very, very strong plan in this position. So I think this is a very good training position for you to think on. I'll take a 2-second pause for you guys to think on this position. All right. So f5, e into f6 is a possibility, but I know, but it's not a good move, because after g into f6, black gets a file against the white king. A file is opened against the white king, and it gives unnecessary counterplay to black. So, and then also it, I think it frees up some of black's position. Plus it gives the f5 square, sorry, the f5 square to the e7 knight. So into f6 strategically would be a bad decision, but so white plays rook b5, white plays queen a6, and now the main plan that was planned by Maxime, by the white player, bishop c1. King f7, bishop a3. The bishop on d2 wasn't doing much. It was just inside the white pawn structure. It wasn't doing much. It didn't have any scope, right? So, but the bishop on a3, it's putting fantastic pressure on the e7 knight. And as you will see in the next few moves, why the bishop to a3 was such a great plan. Black plays rook b8, takes the knight on e7, king e7. And again, I think here deserves another pause, another training moment. So you guys can think on what would white play next. But let's see. G4. By playing G4, you know, like first by exchanging the knight on e7, white took out one of the defenders of the f5 pawn, right? So the knight on e7 was protecting the f5 pawn. That has been exchanged. So there is one less defender of the f5 pawn, and after g4, I want to take the pawn on f5. So there is no other choice for black but to take f into g4. And once it does that, white can infiltrate into black's position with queen h7. So let's say this variation f into g4, I'll play queen h7. And if the king protects the g7 pawn with king f7, then boom, f5. I start attacking black's position. Into f5, queen into f5 check. Now I'm attacking the knight on d7. King comes back to e7, knight f4. After e into f5, the d5 pawn has become weak. And if black protects it by playing rook into d5, I play into b5. And if rook into b5, then the next series of moves are going to be really bad for black. Rook f1. White doesn't have to exchange the rook on b5. So only by playing rook f1, he's now going to use the rook on f1 to attack black's king. So let's say, for example, black decides to play something like rook b2, then I can take knight into d5. So rook b2 is not possible. If he plays something like queen a2, then I can start black's position on the king side by playing queen e6 check, king d8, and then knight into d5. And again, black has no other attack here. So this is a really powerful idea by white to brute force open black's kingside. And I think by this point, black is already lost. I mean, he's strategically lost, and white just needs to keep his head cool together so that he doesn't make any blunders. And as I said, black is strategically lost. So white just has to be careful here, not make any serious mistake, and he should win the game here. I just don't see a way for black to protect against these threats that white is making. So black will rook into b5, into b5, rook into b5, and we enter a queen knight versus queen knight endgame. What black tried to do here is that he has tried to exchange the rooks. As you can see, white has this option of playing rook to f1 and continue the attack on the king side. So for that reason, the best fighting chance, the fighting chance was to exchange as many pieces as you can. So I think that was the best defensive decision, but I don't think it changes the result of the game. Black takes e into f5 and knight g3. Great move. See, white could have taken queen into f5, and I think white is doing fine here, but it gives black a chance to defend his king side by playing queen e6. So again, black gets a chance to exchange more pieces, because if, let's say, white retreats, then I have queen g4 check, and black will get a lot of counterplay. And so white is forced to exchange queens, and here black gets a fighting chance. So for that reason, as I said earlier, white has to be careful not to allow any counterplay to black. And knight g3 is a great move in that regard. So now he can take with the knight, and he doesn't have to exchange the queens. So again, another great move. Queen d6, knight into f5 check, king f8. And white decides to enter, white decides, and more importantly, calculates how he can enter into black's position. So on the king side, black is controlling a lot of squares, but white identifies this diagonal. Fantastic. So he's going to play queen a3, and then he's going to enter black's position by playing queen a3 check. So black goes queen e6. He wants to protect those squares, d6 and e7. White plays knight g3, queen g4, and king g2, and queen into f4. So black takes back one pawn by playing queen into f4, but then white enters into black's position. I got to say that if black hadn't taken the pawn on f4, then white was planning to play f5, and then it's an even precarious. It's an even more precarious position for black. He's controlling a lot of important squares in black's position. He can play f6. I'm not saying he will play f6, but he can play f6 and try to undermine black's king side. So for that reason, black went with this plan of taking the pawn on f4, into a7, the knight on d7 is attacked. Right? Black plays king e7, and now, as we saw a few moves before, white enters into black's position, into black's king side. Queen a3 check, king d8, queen d6. I'm attacking the d5 pawn, and unfortunately, there is no way for black to defend the d5 pawn. And if he goes after the c3 pawn, let's say by queen d8 check, king h3, queen into c3, then white just plays e6, and boom, there is checkmate. So black is tied down to f4 because he has to prevent e6, and that's why he's pinning this pawn. But he cannot play. He cannot prevent white from taking the pawn on d5. Right. So this is already lost for black. One fighting chance. Black played g5. I don't know what's the idea behind this one. I think it's more of a desperado or an admission of defeat. Black takes H into G6, H5, G7, and here Black player resigns. So here Ian Nepomniatchtchi resigned. He cannot prevent G at Queen, and if he plays something like Queen G4, then I play Queen F5 check, or I can even play E6. And yeah, this position is lost for Black in 100 different ways. So, all right, thank you for looking at this video. What we saw in this game is how White's center and his pressure on the king side ultimately allowed White to win the game. Though we saw some strategical mistakes by Black, I think especially playing C4 was a strategical mistake, but hey, I mean, we are here to study from other players' mistakes, and so I think this was a good lesson. Also, I think it was a bit ironic that Vachier Lagrave, who is from France, who is a Frenchman, beat the French defense. So there is a little irony in there. All right, thank you for watching the video, and if you like it, feel free to hit the subscribe button.